Okay, in this video lesson you're going to learn how to factor trinomials. So before we start factoring, let's do a couple of problems with multiplying because factoring is just working backwards. So factoring trinomials, what we're really going to end up with are two binomials. So let's just review how to multiply binomials. So when we multiply binomials, you're either using the box method or you were using the distributive property twice. Either way, when you distribute through or use the box method, you always end up with 4 terms, and then there was always 2 terms that you could combine. So x plus 2 times x plus 6 becomes x squared plus 8x plus 12. So example 2, I'm using the same numbers over again. I'm just going to change where the negative signs are. So this time I'm going to keep the x plus 2, but I'm going to change it to x minus 6. So when I distribute through or use the box method, I end up with a x squared, a negative 6x, a positive 2x, and then a negative 12. And I'm always able to combine those 2 middle terms to give me negative 4x. Okay, same thing. This time I'm going to put the negative with a 2 and not with a 6. So you should distribute through. Those are our 4 terms. You can combine the 2 middle terms, and we get x squared plus 4x minus 12. And then the last one, I'm going to make them both negative this time. This time I get a negative 6x, a negative 2x, and this time a positive 12 again. And I end up with x squared minus 8x plus 12. So here's what all 4 of them look like at the same time. So here is our original questions, and then here are our solutions. So it's important to know, because you can't factor trinomial unless you know that this last term, the constant, is always created by multiplying the constants in the original problem. So 2 times 6 is a positive 12. 2 times negative 6 is a negative 12. Negative 2 times 6 is a negative 12. And negative 2 times negative 6 is a positive 12. The other term, the middle term, is always created by the addition of the constants. So 2 plus 6 is 8. 2 and a negative 6 is a negative 4. Negative 2 and 6 is a positive 4. And negative 2 and negative 6 is a negative 8. So if you know this, if the middle term you know is always created through the addition of the constants, and the last term is always created through the multiplication of the constants, then you can factor any trinomial. So let's work backwards. I'm going to start off with a trinomial, x squared plus 6x plus 8. So you need to ask yourself, what multiplies to give me 8, but when I add it will give me 3? And hopefully you can come up with the numbers of 2 and 4. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to make 6x become 2x and 4x because I haven't changed the problem. When I combine those, I'll still get 6x. So those of you who like to factor by grouping, we're going to look at the first 2 terms. They both have an x in common. The second 2 terms both have a 4 in common. So I'm going to factor by grouping. These have an x in common. What's left over is an x plus 2. Both of these have a 4 in common. What's left over is x plus 2. So now I have 2 expressions. This expression and the second expression both have x plus 2 as a factor. So my factors so both of them have x plus 2 as a factor, so that's one of my factors, and then what's left over is x plus 4, and that's my other factor. If you're doing the box method, you still have to ask yourself the same questions. However, you should know that the x squared is going to go in the first box, and the 8 is going to go in the last box. What you need to do is figure out what should go in these 2 boxes. So again, you ask yourself, what multiplies to give me 8, but when I add them gives me 6x. And that's going to give you a 2x and a 4x. So then you just have to fill out the rest of your box. X squared is x and x. To give me 2x, I already have the x, so I just need the 2. And then to get the 4x, I just need the 4 out here. And then you can check. 2 plus 4 gives you the 8 that you need. So the factors are the same, x plus 4 and then x plus 2. Let's look at another example. Okay, x squared minus 9x minus 10. So again, you need to ask yourself, what multiplies to give me negative 10, but when I add it, it's going to give me a 9. And that's going to be, and this is where you have to think about your integer rules. That's negative 10 and a positive 1. So my negative 9x is going to break up into negative 10x and a positive 1. So now we're going to factor by grouping. You're going to group the first two together and then group the second two together. So the first two both have an x in common. X minus 10 is what's left over. The second two terms have a 1 in common. What's left over is x minus 10. So they both have x minus 10. That's one of my factors. And then what's left over on the outside is the x plus 1. So filling out the box, you would have the x squared. You would have the negative 10. Again, you have to go back. What multiplies to give me negative 10 but adds to give me negative 9? And that's where you're going to fill in your negative 10x and your 1x. The placement of these don't matter. So now work backwards. X squared will be x times x to give me 1x. That has to be a 1. And to give me negative 10x, that has to be a negative 10. So I get the same factors. X minus 10 would be the first factor. X plus 1 is the second factor. Okay, one more example. X squared minus 7x plus 12. So what multiplies, it's supposed to be a multiplication sign, to give you positive 12, but when you add it, gives you 7. And hopefully you can come up with a negative 3 and a negative 4. So I'm breaking my negative 7 up into negative 3x and negative 4x. And then I'm going to group. These both have a greatest common factor of x. I'm left with x minus 3. For me to get an x minus 3 a second time in the parentheses, this is where you have to think ahead, I need to factor out a negative 4. When I factor out a negative 4, I will get that x minus 3. And you can double check by distributing. Negative 4 times x is negative 4x. Negative 4 times negative 3 is a positive 12. Both of my expressions have x minus 3. So that's one of the factors. And then the other factor is x minus 4. So same thing with the box. X squared. That should be a positive 12 as the constant. So positive 12. And then I should have negative 4x and negative 3x or vice versa. So then you just have to break everything up. X times x, that's going to be a negative 4 and negative 3. And I end up with the same exact factors I got down below with the grouping. You just need to decide what method works best for you and stick with the method that you've picked so you become comfortable with it. I hope you learned something new, and I look forward to seeing you in class.